Hello guys and welcome to practical number 2 for SQL injection. So my name is Ngane Emmanuel and you are watching is a lesson which is part of the series building secure, scalable, low latency, fault tolerant applications using Spring Boot and Java. My name is Ngane Emmanuel and I am a software engineer and I'm taking you for this course. And today we are going to be looking at a practical session for our last lessons, which as you know, for those who watched the last videos, we're talking about security. And as promised, we're going to be looking at the first kind of security vulnerability, which is injection vulnerability. And we're going to be looking at SQL injections, okay, to begin with. So in the next 2 to 3 videos, we'll be building out the endpoint, and then we'll be testing it, and we're going to demonstrate how vulnerable it is, and then we are going to secure it using validations, and then safe parameter passing, and then we're going to retest it to understand how the implementation have secured the endpoint. Again, as I always like to reiterate, it is absolutely important to think of security as an active process while building your APIs or your backend or whatever application you're building. It is crucial to not leave security for the end, towards the end of your project, but build it along as you build your application. So if you're liking the series thus far, please give it a thumbs up, like, comment, and share the video. Follow me on my social medias in the description below, and let's dive right in. So last time we built a post endpoint to a register endpoint in the controller. So by now you should have this structure of your folder. You should have gone to GitHub and clone it. The link to the repository is in the description below. So please, if you haven't, then pause this video real quick, go and clone it, and you should be able to see code like this. And hopefully you're following alongside. If not, then you're going to have more codes. But you can always look at the git commits, and I think I give proper names to the commit, so you can check out the lessons. So but also you could just follow the videos and create your own as you go. But if you're following the videos, you should be here and you should have something like this, where we create the endpoint, and then we create a register, and we create a register endpoint, right? And then we tested it. We also created the model, which was the user model. We also used Lombok for data. So I'm just, for those who are here, you can skip. I'm just providing information for those who are new and are just seeing this. And then we have a repository area, where this is our repository, the data layer, which we then implemented our data logic, which is a native query. And as you can see, we are concatenating the inputs directly into the string, so into the query itself. And this entire thing is it's pretty much not safe, and we're going to be looking at why it's not safe. So in this first video, we're going to create a login endpoint to try to demonstrate SQL query and how a user can get unauthorized access and bypass validation. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is open our controller, which is our user controller, and then we're going to create another endpoint, which will be this kind. It's still going to be a post endpoint. We're going to use a post mapping, right? But in this case, we are going to log in, right? So we're going to use the /login, and then we are simply going to build the entire application like this. Now, if you've noticed, I'm using autocomplete. Like I said in the beginning of this video, this is not for me to teach you how to code. This thing should be there. We're basically talking about aspects that allow you to build scalable, secure, low latency applications. So I'll be using a lot of these auto fillers, these AIs to code a lot. But again, we are basically calling the user service, which is in the service layer, which we created last video, and we are calling this login function, which we have not yet created in the user service. So we now have to create this function in the user service. Okay, so we can simply just implement this, create this in the user service, and it's going to return a user, right? And it's going to take the username and the password, which are both strings. Okay, and now we have to return. So we'll just return. We'll have a simple implementation, return a new user, something like that, and password, just like a blah blah. And I'm going to return that. I think we'll just have an end there, something like that. And the first name, on the other hand, so we'll have to return something like this, but this is just for place filling, just so that we shouldn't see much of the error, but it doesn't matter because you get the error. But essentially, we need now to implement this, and we're going to do the same here. We're going to call the repository area, or that's what we are going to do. We're going to call the user repository dot, right, and how do we want to log in? Okay, we want to say, can we just wait? So when we are logging in, we want to find a user by the name who have the same password, right? So we want to say login. Let's just create a function login, right? And it's going to pass in the username and password. So this is a basic implementation of a login. Of course, this is not the best way to go around it, but this gives you a basic idea. And this simulates a lot of instances that used to happen. Okay, so I have a function login, and that is going to return a user, right? So in the repository, we need to now create a method. In the repository, we need to create a method called login. So we're going to define public user, right? And we're just going to have login. Okay, now once again, that is implemented automatically, and I'm going to explain. So what this does is it creates a function that takes in two parameters, the username and the password, which we are passing in the user service. Again, it all originates from the controller, and it is sent by the user on the client side using a request body. So at the repository level, we then create a string called the SQL, which represents our query, and this holds the query we are trying to execute. So we are trying to generate the entire query by using this particular statement. And what we're saying is that select all from users, the table where username is equal to, then we concatenate the username, the variable, and password is equals to, we concatenate the password. Okay, variable, okay, and then we're going to have var, and then we're going to create a variable called result, which is going to represent our user result, and we are going to get an entity manager that create native query SQL that user class, and we're going to get the result list. This is going to get a single result, and we're going to check if it is empty, then we're going to return null, which means that if this user does not exist, then we return null, else we are going to return the first object that is returned. Obviously, because hopefully this is going to return just one, we're just going to return the first object. Let's say that this is your user. Okay, this is your user, and So this is your query, right? And we return the user, which is casted into a user object, and then this is going to get returned here, and it's also going to get returned back into the controller, right? So um, I don't know if so. The last time, let me check if my SQL is running. So bear with me. Yeah, my SQL is running. So I could look at Workbench. Okay, and we were here, so I could look at the user table, and yeah, so we have the password, and we have John Doe. Okay, and we have the username John Doe and then password ID. So can we test this particular endpoint? So let's see if we can test this, if we can get the user back. So I'm going to open Postman. I'm going to go to Postman. I'm going to try to open Postman. Hopefully it opens. Okay. And we also want to create a new query in Postman add new request. And this will be a post request. And we are basically using the same. I will do login. Alright, so we'll go to the request name and we're going to input the URL. Remember, if you're following the last video, you understand that our application is going to run on port 8081. And then we are sending a request body, which is going to be, we're going to use raw data. And this is going to allow us to create a JSON data format. And we are going to have the username, and it's going to be, right, so John Doe. There we go. I'm going to have a password, and this is going to be what was that? What's the password? 1234. Okay, so it's going to be 1234. And so this is our request. So if we are supposed to send this, we should be able to get a response. But before we do that, we need to run the application. So right, so application started at port 8081, and we are going to try to send the request. As you can see, our query executed perfectly, and we have logged in. It returns the complete object and say that's how we have logged in. So normally you are supposed, when you send this login, okay, now this is just an attack and I'm demonstrating, but obviously normal procedure will be once you send a username and password or a token, after validation, as we have just attempted to do, you create like a session, or you return, or you redirect to another page. Okay, but for the sake of this, we are going to return the object for me to make you understand how a user can basically use this particular string and put an SQL command that overrides, that causes this particular query to run completely different than what we have just seen being executed. And one of the most interesting way is, you say this username is being concatenated directly into the username. Okay, so what can we do in order to, in order to make sure that the username is correct? So we can say in this particular query, we can say where username. So we can inside here we can say username equal to 1, or just say admin, whatever it is. We don't really care. But now we create another query, or 1 equals to 1. Okay, this will always be true. And then password equals to what? Let's just say password is equals to so username equals to 1, and then we have like a closing bracket there, because I think if you look at the string, it opens here with a single bracket to put the string there, and then we have equals to 1 here. So yeah, so we can have like a 1, just say equal to 1, something like that. Right, and we can have like a password. The password can also be, again, the password is a string. We're assuming the password is a string there, so we can say password is equal to let's say whatever it is. We can just put the gibberish there, whatever it is, and then but what we want to do, we close that and put all. Now that's, we now get into a query, so we bypassed password, or again we do the same here, 1 equal to 1. I hope that's doing that correctly. And hopefully if I send it again, yeah, you see we've gotten the result. Now you could be asking, nothing has changed, but you realize that the password, so if I send a request, as you can see, it returns an OK, but the password, this is not the password, this is not what we have here, right? The username is not this complete string, and the password is not that complete string. So what has happened is that we have bypassed this authentication mechanism by using our own custom query within the string that we are sending to you, alongside the request to the backend, to the API. And so because of the API's implementation of validation or verification by binding the user parameters directly within the query without validation or safe passing, it allows us to modify the string in such a way that we can fail the initial test, but because our own, and then pass our own custom test that we create, and so our test will always be true, allowing us to return a host of to return any user data. So if I go ahead and say so if we go to the post and I say I want to go to, so I want to put John Doe 2, right? John Doe 2, and I just add to the database, and I come back to this request. I don't know how many times I'll send it for it to, so it keeps returning John Doe 1. I wanted to see, so basically it's going to return the first option, okay? But if and just to make you understand that this is really bad, you see, the only thing that is saving us from not releasing every user in our database is this particular implementation here, where we get just the single result, right? However, if I was to change, if I were to say change, let's say get result list, let's say result, right? So that's the result list. if I were to change this to a list, okay, of users, right? So if I were to change this implementation, I just want to show you how so okay, so list, no, so like a list of users. I think, do we cast all of them? Does that work? No. It's provided user required list of user. I don't know why the so get result list result dot is empty. It's not empty. That contains all dot add all. Reverse stream dot to list. Does that work? It is written in Java. So I think it contains objects. Yeah. So this contains objects, and each object will have to cast them individually. So I think just for the sake of this, we can go with var user list. Start result. Check casting, list of type result. Yes, so we can do this. Return. Does that help? Anyway, so if we do that, we return the result list. So the user service itself is also returning the list of users, which will return. So I just want to show you that. I hope this works. And so the controller itself will return a list of users, allowing us to see the actual damage that implementation can cause. Okay, so if I was to attempt to run it, so we have a particular warning here on check cast. Yes, so the idea is that if I send, I should see more than one. There we go. So what has happened is that normally we are supposed to get a single value when we authenticate. However, the damage of this is that the only thing that was saving us is that we're only returning a single state, a single user. Okay, and sometimes your database, what I was trying to do was try to run it as many times to see whether I pick another user up. But sometimes your database, it can pick a different user, and depending on which gets indexed first, you can pick it and then returns a different user each time. However, the real damage to see is that if you have a vulnerable section where you have to return like multiple list of users, now that becomes bad, really bad. especially say if I have admin privileges. You realize what has happened, that with this query I'm able to get all your users information. We have 2 users in the database, and here are all their information laying bare. I can get their username, their password, and I can use each individual information to do separate attacks, separate login, do different malicious activities. And this is what an SQL injection looks like at a very basic level. It is really bad, and you should never have this kind of implementation. And so this is a controlled attack that we have just simulated, and it is important that you understand the dangers of having a flawed implementation, such as direct concatenation of your parameters to into your query, right, without validation. You did not see us doing any validation, not in a controller level, right? Of course, even in the next video, we're going to avoid doing validation at a controller level, just because I've kept that particular section for another time. We will do it in the service level, where we're going to use a sanitizer to sanitize our inputs, and also we are also going to use ORMs to be able to pass parameters safely, because they implement that feature. Later on, we'll look at DTOs, which is where the validation and the controller levels comes in by using DTOs. It's very important. We're going to see all of that. But you always want to leave your controllers as dry as possible. It's good design, just as simple as that. And most of your logic should occur or be implemented within the service layer, and the repository layer should have its own database implementations. So this is a vulnerability we have just simulated, and I hope that this makes sense. I hope that you understand the dangers of using an SQL query, the dangers of SQL injection. As you have seen, we are able to get all our database, and we can do even worse. Okay, we can do a whole lot with this particular query, right? So I could, if we have other endpoints, vulnerable endpoints, we could exploit it and dump our entire database. And you wake up one morning and your application, no user, you have no users again. Every data is gone, right? You can also just collect data and sell it and do a lot of other things. So very important, avoid direct parameter binding or concatenation. Always validate input and use DTOs, which we are going to see in later videos, later subsequent lesson. I think the one after the one which will be following this lesson, right? That's the lesson of injection vulnerability. So that said, I hope you've enjoyed this video. In the next video, we are going to look at how we are going to protect this endpoint. We're going to look at passing parameters safely into the query. We're going to look at the implementation of ORMs, and we're going to see how that works and how that protects against SQL queries such as this. All right, so if this has been helpful to make you understand about SQL injections, even though it's simple, and I think most people, or the bulk of us, basically use this example to understand it, please give this video a thumbs up, comment your questions and your thoughts in the comment below, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. Subscribe to the channel, like, share, and also connect with me on my LinkedIn and my Facebook, and you can check the GitHub repo for all of what we have been doing thus far. That said, thank you for watching, and see you next video. Bye.